Okay, hello everyone and welcome. My name is James Dearsley. I'm the marketing manager here at Bee Craft, and once again you're joining us for one of our Bee Craft Hangouts. And I'm just turning that off on the main site. There we go. So thank you for joining us. It's a Wednesday evening just after Valentine's Day, so I hope all your bees got treated well. In fact, what's the patron saint? It's Cupid, isn't it? I can't remember. There's not a patron saint of Valentine's Day, is there? Anyway. Who knows? But I hope your bees got treated well anyway. So look, we're joined as usual by Wendy, my my partner in crime with Bee Craft, and Margaret, who's thankfully started to join us with a bit of heavyweight discussion, and to answer some of your questions as well. And we've got a new face who's joined us as well. So Stephen, I don't know if you want to just introduce yourself quickly so people can put a name to a face.
Okay, I'm Stephen Fleming. I live in north part of Hampshire, and I'm the sort of newish commissioning editor for Bee Craft. So I'm especially interested, anyone out there who would like to write some articles for Bee Craft or indeed suggest some topics for Bee Craft, I'm all ears. I'd like to know what the readership would like to learn more about.
Fabulous. So for the just over 20 people who've already joined us already on, what I'm just going to do now to sort of work with Stephen's comment there is I'm just going to do a little bit of a screen share here for you, because most of you will be watching this through our basic our main Bee Craft page, and you'll see here probably the screen that you're looking at. Now underneath the image of what you're looking at, you'll see the ask a question bit. So if you want to pass a comment, a criticism, a question, or whatever, just use this little option here where it says click to ask a question, and just pop in your details, and do please pop it in there, because ultimately what we like to try to do here is to get some interaction from yourselves, and it is live, so we are able to do that. So I would welcome any sort of comments that we've got going on. So what I thought we would just do to sort of kick ourselves off, and while some of the questions come in, because we've actually had a few in already, which is very kind of you, so thank you for that, is we'd start with this month's magazine, which is just coming out now. I think the email is due out, if not this evening, probably first thing tomorrow morning for the online editions. We'll have a little look through and sort of scope out some of the articles which have gone in for this month. And let me again just share my screen so those of you who are watching can see it. So we'll get the nice image, which I think is a lovely one actually. Where did this come from? Margaret, do you know? Was this one of the readers' photos?
Yes, they're all the competition winners for the photographic competition.
Yeah, it's a good one, isn't it? It's nice. I don't know who, we haven't got a reference to who that one was, I don't think. Where we are.
The photograph is by Hugh Coakley, March's winner in our cover photo competition.
Okay, very good, cool. Right, was there any articles in particular that sort of got your attention, Margaret, this month, or was there?
Well, I think they were all, well, quite a lot of them were on beekeeping in warmer places than here. So it was really nice to read about beekeeping in Turkey, for example, and also India and Greece. So it just made you think about summer days. Seems so far away.
Oh, doesn't it just? Well, I'll tell you what, I'm just going to flick past the Salisbury one, because I know you're quite close to there, Stephen, aren't you? So we can come back to the Salisbury one, because I'd love your opinion on that one. But the Turkey one, I thought was actually a really interesting look, because I had the pleasure of driving through Turkey a few years back, and I found it amazing when you're driving through southern Turkey to see this sort of site on the hillsides, where it's quite barren in terms of a landscape. And I think what Mick has done here is really captured sort of the lifestyle of the beekeeper. Because I remember I stopped at one point because some of the hives were very close to the road, and it was exactly like this, with lines upon lines of hives. And I'd gone up to have a look and see what I could find, and it was a little ramshackle shack, in fact. And I'm just going to come off the screen share, so it's a little bit impersonal at times. But I'd gone off of the main road and walked up through that sort of similar landscape with the stones and the trees and the bushes, and sort of gone through a little parting where this little ramshackle hut was, and I just saw about 10 or 15 hives in this little chap's garden, and there was a classic sort of Greek, sort of Turkish man with a big belly and a really big pipe, and the pipe was hanging out of his corner of his mouth, and he was straddling a hive, and he was extracting. So he had the pipe, he had like a massive pipe smoker which he was breathing onto the bees to calm down, but they didn't need it, so he had nothing on him, no protection whatsoever, and was just extracting. And I couldn't communicate with him at all in any way, but he obviously could gather that I was a beekeeper by the fact that I wasn't scared by it. And it was such a lovely sort of half an hour just sitting there, watch him go about meticulously extracting the honey from the hives. And so I really quite enjoyed that article. It's really nice one.
I was quite amused by the line of hives, and just wonder what the drifting issues would be, because I remember John Cosborne, famous beekeeper in Hampshire. He would take his hives to the heather, and he started as a young lad. And when he was a young lad, the other beekeepers, he'd go with other beekeepers, and they would say, "All right, John, you put your hives there," and they would always put him at the end of the line, then knowing full well that the bees will drift towards the center ones, and John wouldn't get nearly as much honey as the rest of them. So that John started learning the hard way.
Oh, but he was annoyed by the end of a couple of seasons, sort of wondering what was going on.
You find out.
Oh dear. So why don't we go into that Salisbury Plain one? Because I know, Stephen, you've actually also written an article in this one as well about the Indian bees. So why don't I just bring up this? What have you done any beekeeping on Salisbury Plain, Stephen?
No, in fact, I think you must be registered, and so there's only one registered beekeeper there, who is the son of famous beekeeper Field. I forget his first name. He wrote a book. Oliver Field.
Yeah. His son's Robert.
Son's Robert, and the father was Oliver, who I think passed away a year or two ago. Anyway, Robert has the license, as it were, to keep bees on the plain. I was fascinated by that because Salisbury Plain is quite close to me, and we often go cycling there when we can, because very often it's closed. So you have to be very careful as to when you can go cycling. And I've often looked at the wildflowers there and thought, wow, I wonder what sort of honey you get from that, because it really is a landscape that you don't see anywhere else. There's farming around the periphery, but then in the center, it's just this landscape that a lot of Britain would have looked like maybe 100 years ago. So I was fascinated to read this article and to hear about the honey, because I've actually also had some of the honey there, because at certain times of year you can get to the center of the plain, a place called Imber. If anybody's interested, you can go there around Easter time, because there's a church there. And in the church, they will sell some of the honey from Salisbury Plain. So I just love this article and would recommend anybody to take the opportunity to go to Imber when it's open. If you Google Imber Church online, you'll probably find out the opening times. And it's quite amazing.
How do you spell Imber? Is it I-M?
I-M-B-E-R. Okay. And Imber, in fact, looks, believe it or not, looks faintly like my home city of Belfast during the Troubles, because it's exactly designed that way for the army to train there. So it's really bizarre seeing this urban construction in the middle of Salisbury Plain that was vaguely familiar to me from quite a few years ago, and then to find these beehives beside the church and the honey on sale. So I'd recommend a visit there for anyone. And the article is a lovely article written by Richard Rickett.
It's good, isn't it? I quite liked. I mean, it's an interesting stat at the start where it said 98% of the UK used to have those lowland sort of meadows, and we just don't have it anymore. So it's just to bring up your point. But I also liked his the little section about the military manoeuvres, because obviously that must be cause havoc with the regularity of inspections in the summer. When obviously, I mean, how can you've got to ring them up to get permission to go on to inspect your bees? I'm sorry, there's an activity, or what are they called?
Well, he does talk about one apiary they tried to get to, and they weren't allowed, and the phrase was, "Sorry, chaps deployed."
Good. It's always fun, isn't it? So, Margaret, was there anything else in there which sort of got your attention as well before I come back to Stephen on his Indian bees? Because I wanted to boil into that in a little bit more detail. Was there anything else you saw in there?
Yes, we had an interesting article by Peter Tompkins, who was working at Rothamsted when the Apidicta was launched. And so he has quite a bit to say about that and how they tested it. He tells you what they found and various other things like that. There's about a page.
For the uninformed of us, an Apidicta?
Oh, sorry. We briefly introduced it last issue. It was a device made by an engineer from the BBC, and he was hoping that he could listen to the bees and predict when they might swarm from the sounds they made. And he actually produced the Apidicta as a commercial venture, but I don't think it did very well.
I tell you, it's interesting because there's something I want to talk about a little bit later, because I'm quite fascinated by the sort of the use of technology with beekeeping. And there's been a few, and I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with some of the, there's the Internet of Things where everything is connected to everything else. And there's been a few companies, and I think there's a couple in the US who are testing sound as a measure. So they'll have similar, well, much smaller sensors within a hive to look at temperature and sound as an indicator of swarming and that sort of stuff. So it is quite
well, it's very timely, because I don't know if you've seen in the press the last few days, and the mainstream press has cottoned on to it, this whooping noise of bees. And that's work being done by Martin Benchick in Nottingham. And indeed, he's been looking for some time at what sounds might indicate that bees are going to swarm sometime in advance. There was an article in Bee Craft a few months ago about Martin's work, and obviously he's developed it because there's another paper just came out, which the press has leapt upon over the last few days. So it's well worth looking if anybody wants to have a Google around for that. And there's a bit of a video going with some of the stories with that as well. So I think Martin's work up in Nottingham is very interesting.
Absolutely. No, it sounds it. Definitely does sound it. I mean, I just want to bring in a couple of comments here for a second, if I can. Amanda, thank you for your comment, who says, here in France, we have a wildflower meadow in front of our beehives, but instead of military tanks, which is a shame, as in Salisbury Plain, we have the chassé, the hunt, to contend with. Yeah, that's a bit of a different one, isn't it? And Ian, thank you for clarifying. We'll talk about a mind blank. Hi, James. For your information, of course, I know this is terrible. The patron saint of Valentine's Day is
Saint Valentine.
Christ. How bad.
We thought we'd keep that one from you, James.
He's also one of the patron saints of beekeepers. There are 2 or 3 beekeeping saints. There you go. Okay, cool. Right, I tell you what, last thing, because I do want to focus on this one, because it was one of your articles, in fact, in this. So, Stephen, do you want to tell us a little bit about the article that you had in Bee Craft this month?
Okay, yeah. I've been going to India for the past 5 Christmases. As you can probably guess, I love the place. And each year I've gone and found out a little bit more about bees. And this year I found a lot more about the bees, but just because you get more and more contacts as you go. And the variety is just astonishing, because they've got about 5 different types of honeybees and all sorts of ways of getting honey. So this, I've done 2 articles on this. Well, in fact, I've got to write the second, but I've written the first one, which focuses on the honey hunting with Apis dorsata. And this is a big bee, and I do mean a big bee. It's pretty scary to see. And it has nests in the open, either on cliff faces or on trees. And in fact, in the article, I've included one of the bee trees that I cycled under, which is just an amazing sight. You're going along the road and you look up and suddenly there are 6 nests of bees up above your head in the open. And I was lucky enough as well to get in with some of the Adivasi tribe. The Adivasis are the indigenous people of India, and they are very numerous. We never get to hear about them, but they are extremely numerous. And I was lucky enough to stay in an Adivasi village, as it were. They don't quite have villages, but it was right down in the valleys in the Western Ghats. And they were able to tell me a bit about the honey hunting, although they didn't do it themselves. It's just for certain tribes. And there's some great stories about the honey hunting that they tell. And I was able to taste some of the honey, which is very different from our honey. It's a very, very dark honey from Apis dorsata. Not probably as high sugar content. They say they eat it quickly in case it ferments. I think they just eat it quickly anyway. And it was just great hearing about that. And I'd love to see honey hunting in action, but I wasn't there at the right time of year. But when the magazine comes out, I'll post some YouTube videos which show the honey hunting in action, because a couple of charities are working with the Adivasi tribes and have made some videos. And there's a hope that the honey hunting will continue, but India is a fast-changing country, and who knows what will happen.
Please, am I right in saying this is the one where they have the ropes over the top of the cliffs and they climb down?
Yeah, they can do. Oh.
Because there's been a few. Who was it? Was it a BBC documentary? And it was called literally The Honey Hunters.
Yeah.
And it was the most incredible bit of footage, up close, looking almost from a sort of the honey hunters' view of them using their great big poles that cut the combs, which is, I mean, massive. I mean, I've got to share that, because that image, and I'm sorry it took me so long to find it, Stephen, but this image here, this is what you were talking about, I presume, and that there is the comb, is that right?
That's right. There you can see several combs in that tree, and I had just that was not far from Mysore, and I had just cycled under it and happened to look up, and lo and behold, all these nests were there. Very often with those sort of trees, you will find somebody at the base selling the honey. And I think they kind of commandeer the tree. It becomes their honey tree from which they sell the honey and the wax. But there was nobody at that tree for whatever reason. It looked very healthy indeed.
It's fabulous, isn't it? Absolutely fabulous. I tell you what, ever since I saw that, in fact, probably about 2 or 3 years ago, I know one of the production companies were trying to do a series on the honey hunters. To sort of follow them, because I actually had a chat with them about it, because I was saying, that is so dramatic as footage goes. And it was one of the celebrities had gone out there and done this footage with them as well. And I do remember so clearly, there's one bit of footage on YouTube, I think, when one of the combs actually hits one of the people on the ground on top when they're doing it on the cliff and they're cutting it away. And that is quite, I mean, it's quite a heavy bit of comb that falls on this poor chap's head.
I think it's about 40 plus kilos can be in a nest, and they're usually single comb nests. There can be huge things. And I especially liked, they told me this song, they didn't sing it, but they were able to recite it, about as they go honey hunting, as they would leave the village. And it's about the person who is holding the rope, would hold it. He would be the brother-in-law of the person dangling at the end of the rope, and that was very deliberate, because they knew that the brother-in-law wouldn't want to make his sister a widow. So it was his duty to make sure the husband came back safely.
Excellent.
Nice, isn't it? Yeah, it's good. All right. So, I mean, a fascinating article. I mean, genuinely, I mean, there's some really good ones in there. I think, let's be brutally honest about the magazine this month. It's very much, we're fed up with the cold weather, and we're looking for warmer climates, I think, isn't it? So there we are. Okay, so for those of you who are watching, we've actually had a few good questions coming in. So let's just go through these. In fact, actually, I'm just going to stop. So Claire, our editor, is watching, and Northants Beekeeping Association have got on their website who the patron saints of beekeepers are. So any of you guys know the patron saint of beekeepers?
I think there are 3 or 4, aren't there?
Any names?
One begins Gob. I've forgotten.
Ambrose.
There's one that just happened.
Yes, yeah. The usual answer is St. Ambrose. There is a legend that as an infant, a swarm of bees settled on his face while he lay in his cradle, leaving behind a drop of honey. His father considered this a sign of his future eloquence and honeyed tongue. Among other patrons, he is a patron saint of bees, beekeepers, and candle makers. But Gob, Stephen, was good.
Yeah, listen, I wouldn't dare attempt the second syllable. With being Irish, I'm pulled in one particular direction.
And he's Irish, which is, so it's St. Gobnai.
Gobnai, is it? Right.
N-A-I-T.
That's much more polite than the one I was thinking of.
Was born in Ireland in the 5th or 6th century. Gobnai is Irish for Abigail, meaning brings joy. As a patron saint of beekeepers, her name has been anglicised as Deborah.
All right. Okay.
Not quite as nice, is it?
It's amazing what you learn on a hangout, isn't it?
Claire, thank you. And anyway, I'll give. So there's St. Ambrose, St. Gregory, St. Carlemai, St. Gobnai, and St. Dominic, who started beekeeping in Wales. And when he returned to Ireland, he gave his hives to St. David. Brother Adam of Buckfast Abbey in Devon is a recent example of his strong link between the church and beekeeping. So there we are. Thanks, Claire, for that. That's good. All right, so let's just go through a couple of the questions coming in. So there's been a few. So John Forster, thanks, John, for this. Yeah, good question, actually, because obviously you on this panel, we're all over the UK. And he asks, are any of the panel's bees active yet? He has polyhives, like you, Wendy.
Yes.
And all my hives and nukes are very active in this mild weather and midday sun. And they're taking in pollen from crocuses and snowdrops up in Cumbria, so that's quite up north. How are your hives, Wendy? Are yours flying with your polyhives as always?
Yeah, I mean they were actually flying a couple of weeks ago. You know, if you hit the right day, and it's really good to see, because I mean we've been out and when it was just after the colder weather, we were going out and just having a quick peek inside, and some of them are actually, some of the hives are actually burgeoning with bees already. So they've obviously been doing very well. Some are doing better than others, but yeah, they're starting to be active. I just hope we don't get another, you know, really cold spell. But I'm still hefting at the moment, because although they can get pollen, there isn't any nectar around, as far as I'm aware, anyway.
Yeah.
So,
well, we'll come on to that, because we had a couple of questions about feeding actually.
Yeah.
So, Margaret, how are your hives? Are they active yet?
Well, only at midday if it's sunny.
And where
Most
are
of
you
the time
geographically, just for people to know? Whereabouts are you?
Derbyshire.
Derbyshire. Okay, so a little bit
Yes.
further north.
Yep.
Stephen, with you, you're down south?
Not much activity yet. They were just out doing a bit of laundry spotting this week on Tuesday, but apart from that, not much. And in fact, just here, you might be able to see it. This is my observation hive in the office. And I didn't mean to overwinter them this year, but I ran out of time to transfer them. And they are still motoring through. They've kept going throughout the winter, but they're not venturing out much at all. As soon as they start venturing out, I'll know all about it.
Yeah, no, mine have been actually quite active. It's similar to yours, Wendy, really, which is especially on obviously the warmer days and sort of in and around midday. So, but I'm in Surrey, so again, I'm at that little bit further south, and seem to be pretty active. So that's good. On that note, Andy, I got your question. I'll come back to that, so don't worry. We had a couple of questions about feeding, so let me just, I'm going to go into them. So Joe has popped a question saying, as we head into spring, we're going to have periods of quite warm weather and cold weather. Hers have been out today, active, bringing in hazel pollen. Interesting. So got crocus, hazel. Will she have to feed them again? So that was from Joe. A similar question came in from Martin, who's saying he's had a few warnings, emergency warnings about feeding, which seems to have happened the last few years, to be fair. It'll be handy to know how much extra one should give. Do the bees just use it for consumption, or do they tend to store some? And he asked the last question because if they store some, looking at what is left would be no indication of their needs. Quite interesting question. So, Wendy, you mentioned about hefting your hives. So
yes,
do you
I'm
heft to feed, or
have to make sure that they've got sufficient in there. And some of them have been extremely heavy, and others have been quite light. So at this time of year, you can't give them syrup because it's too cold. So in that case, I'd give them fondant, and basically they will only take fondant if they need it for immediate consumption. So that's a pretty good guideline. But once you've started feeding, then obviously you've got to keep an eye on it, particularly at the moment because there's pollen around, as has been said, but there's no nectar at the minute, certainly that I'm aware of anyway.
And what do you feed at the minute? What?
I think actually this year, for the first time, I've given them candy pollen, and just put open a bag directly on top of the frames. I always use an eek for mine, so put the bag obviously open on top of the frames, the eek on top, but then inside the eek I'll always put I use Recticel actually, which is an insulating material, and put that down as low as I can so the bees don't have that extra space of the eek to warm. Just a bit of added extra to help them along, really.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I've got a comment coming from Amanda, so thank you, Amanda. She's had 2 -13 degrees. She had -13 degrees 2 weeks ago, so fed candy and treated the hives with oxalic acid. Today was 21 degrees. I mean, Christ, how varied is that weather? And bees flying everywhere. So, yeah, she said, blame the French weather.
To be fair, I mean, I've been treating with oxalic acid as well when checking the hives. When I've gone along and actually hefted and needed to feed, then I've given them oxalic at the same time. But we have done the oxalic acid treatment on our bees in the cold.
Yeah, I think from last month's hangout, there's a lot of people doing that as well, weren't there, from memory? So that makes sense. And Stephen, I think in our discussions beforehand, you don't feed generally.
I am really lucky. Part of it's where I'm in the country. Part of it's probably I'm lucky with very prolific bees, and I haven't fed in any systematic fashion all of this century, believe it or not. I just keep an eye at this time of year to make sure the hives are heavy enough. And occasionally I have to put on a bit of candy, or a trick that I learned once that works for me, if they don't need very much, is to get a kilo bag of sugar, punch a few holes in it with a fork, dip it in put it in a bucket of water for just not very long, just a few seconds, and then put that on top of the hive. So they quickly rushes into the sugar, gives them enough liquid to work with, and they can eat that. And I've used that once or twice over the years on a hive that's been very that's been very light, and they have taken to it and eaten it. But I'm lucky down here. I really don't need to feed, and for that I am very grateful.
Yeah, I have to say I've always been quite lucky. I've done some pollen patties over the last few years, but nothing a lot more than that. It could just be the south. Margaret, what about you? Do you feed at this time of year, and if so, what do you feed?
Yes, I always put some patties on. I'm trying the ones with pollen in this year as well, because if the weather's cold, they can't get out to the pollen. So I'm trying anything really that might help them. About 20 years ago, I found a colony which had died out from starvation. And that was such a sad sight to see, to open it up and see all these little dead bodies and their heads in the cells trying to find some food, that I've been very careful since to make sure I didn't have that happen again.
It's sad, isn't it, when it does happen? It's not a nice thing to see. For those of you who are watching, by the way, we can obviously get your opinion, so please let us know what you do. So just on the page you're watching it, underneath it, you've got the Ask a Question. Pop a question, a comment, or a query, whatever it is, in this little box here and send it, and I can bring it into the sort of discussion. So we've got time for a couple more while we go, because there was quite a serious question prompted, which I think, if I'm honest, we may need a little bit more sort of time and notice. So Nicholas, thank you for sending it through. I'm going to read it out, and I'm going to screen share at the same time. No, that's actually going to be impossible because I can't read and screen share, because it would be impossible to do it. But I will screen share afterwards. So Nicholas has actually put a question in saying, an experiment conducted a number of years ago concluded that feral colonies prefer hives with a far smaller volume than conventional hives. The research led to a conclusion that bees kept in this manner have a far better tolerance to mite infestation and disease resistance as a result of, among other things, swarming. A link to the research is, and I'll just share it to you in a minute, if bees are kept for conservation purposes rather than production, do the panel have any views on what this research could lead to in regards to sustainable beekeeping and improved bee genetics? So just for those of you at home, again, I'm just going to screen share this because I think we probably haven't got time to digest this in a very large way because it is quite a comprehensive discussion. But this is the article here, and actually it was published in sort of almost a year ago, in fact. But it's been sort of making the rounds on social media today. There's been a lot of sort of noise around that and a lot of discussion. So I know. Stephen, I think you've got a little sort of a short opinion, being sort of an academic person. Have you got any sort of initial thoughts on this?
I need to be careful here. I'm a former academic, and it certainly wasn't in biology, so I'm no authority on this. However, I would just say that I was surprised they didn't focus more on the swarming of the bees getting rid of the varroa. They do certainly talk about it, and the article finishes up about that. But I wondered if the swarming midway through the season is ridding the colony of varroa, and that the small colony side of it, I just wondered if it was as relevant. My bees, I've got swarmy bees, they'll swarm every year. I hardly ever carry a queen across 2 winters. But they are good bees in terms of honey producers, and they don't get hit by varroa. I've only had one instance. I do treat for varroa, but I've only had one instance that I've been very alarmed by the levels of varroa. And I've always thought, in part, that's got to do with the fact that these colonies are swarming or wanting to swarm. I manage the swarming. I split them in May usually, and I've often thought that that's helping keep down the varroa population. So I just wondered whether really the focus shouldn't be on the splitting, managing swarming, rather than the small colonies. I don't know. I'd like to see the article in more depth. I've just read the beginning and the end of it. I haven't seen the methodology in between. It's certainly a really interesting article, and of course from a fantastic source, Tom Seeley. You don't get better than that.
Well, when we first got our bees, one of the methods of controlling varroa that was used by the people, the chap that we bought the bees from, was in fact to give them a brood break, and to actually at certain stages of the year, early about May time, I think he usually does it, was to actually remove all the brood from a hive with the bees, but to remove it all, and just to leave basically some open larvae. So by the time that the larvae then have become bees and emerge, they've had quite a considerable break in the brood. So there's been nowhere for the varroa in the hive to go. And you've got the opportunity then of the brood that you've taken away, of actually, obviously after 21 days you need to go in and make sure that there's no queen cells and dispose of those, or so that you can either recombine that with the original hive, or you can use it to split. So that's one way that he uses. And I was actually at a convention, beekeeping convention last year, and a gentleman from Swindon, Honeybee Conservation Group, who are on Hoskins. I've just seen the note here. I'm just looking at my phone. It's got it on it. He's been keeping bees since 1943. But in 1995, he discovered some of his bees were actively grooming mites from each other. And by swapping queens around, he was able to prove that the grooming ability was genetic and not simply a learned ability. He's actually never, ever treated his bees for varroa. I found that to be quite an interesting observation. So, you know, the research that's going into it, I think, is, you know, extremely valuable.
And I heard Ron Hoskins last Friday, funnily enough. And there is something interesting going on there, but there's a debate in the scientific community about actually what's happening. because of an issue around the variant of deformed wing virus, which those local bees have, and whether that's an influence or not. It seems to be hotly contested between him and some of the scientists. I'll wait to hear more.
Been an interesting one. On that note, actually, the what you've mentioned just there, Wendy, in the Around the Colony this month, and I'm just going to share it now. There's a little article here about a New Year's resolution for bees and about use the gym, which I thought was quite an interesting little article about Vita have produced a bee gym, and I think there's a little photo down here, and it's an 11 by 11 centimeter plastic frame that bees voluntarily rub their backs and abdomens against it. So self-grooming. So there you go. There's a bee gym for you, which actually leads in to a question we've had in from Darren. Darren has put in here, what are your views on treatment-free beekeeping? And it's an interesting one, and that's a big question. Darren, I think everybody has got, I mean, this is partly why I think I quite like these Bee Craft Hangouts, because everybody has different opinions, and there's not a right and a wrong necessarily, and everyone has different beliefs on it all. I would love to have treatment-free beekeeping, but I recognise that my bees aren't necessarily in the state that I can have treatment-free beekeeping, and I have a mentality of wanting to, but I also have a realistic sort of a head and heart attitude to it, in the sense of I'm not sure I necessarily can. But Margaret, treatment-free, your opinion on all of that?
Well, it would be nice, wouldn't it? But if you look in a beehive and you see your poor little bees are covered in mites, and think about what it must be like to have a mite on you. It's like a dinner plate sized things sucking your blood. It's not very nice, is it? So I think if you've got mites, you need to treat. You know, it's only the best thing to do.
So, okay, on that, I wonder, and I'm going to put this back to you actually, Darren. So in that respect, what Margaret's just said, I would sort of rather use icing sugar, for example, to get bees to sort of try and self-clean. Is that treatment-free? You know, it's not necessarily like a harsh chemical, but it's still a treatment of sorts. Stephen, your thoughts? Treatment-free?
I treat. I can see why people don't want to treat. Wouldn't we all love to treat? I started beekeeping just as Varroa arrived, so it's just part of my management routine. I don't particularly have a problem with treating them personally, but I can see that other people really don't want to. I just hope that their bees are healthy and not affecting bees around.
It's the responsibility to others. It's a fair point, and that's why I have that head and heart thing. Wendy, your thoughts on this? Well, you treat, obviously.
I do, yes. I mean, I would love to be treatment-free, but having lost, in my first year of beekeeping, my most prolific hive, I'm really thrilled how they'd got on. And of course, the bigger your hive, the bigger your Varroa problem. And we actually lost the complete colony to Varroa because there was so much. So, yeah, treating. But interestingly, we just had another question come through, because I see the same questions about a gentleman. Sorry, I can't remember your name, but he's seen a zest hive demonstration, which I have as well, and that's a different issue. But the point that he makes there is that there's a belief that in a zest hive, they said the bees will make smaller cells, and there has been some discussion about whether the size of the cells, which are now larger than they used to be, are actually more conducive to Varroa, because Varroa, as we know, will prefer to go into a drone cell because it's bigger rather than a female cell, which is smaller. So I do wonder whether that small cell, whether there's anything in that a smaller cell does actually help to prevent Varroa increase. Yeah,
it'd be interesting. So that was Rod. So Rod, thanks for sending that in. just to follow up, Stephen, Martin has commented on your point about the sugar. And he says, Stephen mentioned feeding sugar. I, in fact, take a kilo of sugar mixed with about 6 tablespoons of water and a dash of Hive Alive, and then pack it tightly in a paper-lined sponge tin, which can be then turned out in one piece on top of the cluster. It goes down very well.
Okay, yeah.
So thanks, Martin, for that.
Yeah.
Lovely. All right. Well, I mean, the part of the problem with this is we could probably be here all night and talk to our sort of our heart's content about what we know and love. And I think the difficulty is sort of knowing when you've sort of hit peak questions and peak answers. And the good thing is now that actually as part of the magazine, we now have a section dedicated to questions from or what has been prompted from the Bee Craft Hangout. So if any of you guys are watching and you still want to ask a question, please pop a question or a comment in the box beneath the video, because we will be able to feature that in the magazine for next month. So please, yeah, just pop any questions that you have in there. Any last things from yourselves on the panel? Anything I've missed? Anything I've forgotten to say?
I would just like to thank Ian Sherwood, who's sent in, I've just seen this, an idea for articles on more different types of hive. Thanks for that, Ian. Yes, love that one. Good.
Yeah, in fact, and that's a point actually. So Stephen asked at the start of this discussion for any of you who are watching, if you've got any thoughts or queries or suggestions for articles moving forward for us, just pop them in that comments box, and we'll feed them through to the editorial team, and we'll happily bring them into the magazine. So, anything else, Margaret? Wendy, anything for you?
I'll just reiterate that if anyone's watching from an association in the UK, I'm sorry, Amanda, I know you're in France. I'm afraid I can't do it to France. But the offer is there for any association that's running a beginner beekeeping course, that I'm happy to send out some back copies and flyers to support that. So all they need to do is just email me, wendy@bee-craft.com. Give me the dates of the course, a name and address to send the documents to, and we'll take it from there.
Lovely. And on that note, I'm going to finish it with the point that I want to one day be that big fat Turkish man smoking a pipe, scratching a beehive in the foothills of Antalya, which would be very nice.
Well, you're growing the beard and tash to go with it, aren't you, James?
Yeah.
We won't say anything about the punch.
I'm trying to drink it. It's trying to go down. Oh, dear. Anyway, thank you so much, everyone, and we'll see you next month. I can't remember the date off the top of my head, but I'm sure between us we'll all get it out to you, and I hope you've enjoyed it. And please pop some questions and comments in the section. So thanks, everyone. See you soon.
Yeah. Bye all.
Bye.